As you heard, I'm an architect, and all of the buildings that we work on are green. We don't have some green buildings and some non-green buildings because I never knew what to call the other ones, right? Are those the toxic buildings? So we just force it on all of our clients equally, and it's worked out pretty well so far. I also do all this other stuff that isn't architecture. I write books, and I teach, and I lecture, obviously, because I realized something, that my job, and ultimately your job, is to make every building a green building. And the sooner we get there, the better off we'll be. So I leverage every media at my disposal to get us to that end. I go on TV and radio, whatever I can do, go all over the country to get us to this future. And the sooner we get there, the better. I also realized something, that we as environmentalists have really been going about it the wrong way. We've been taking traditional buildings and then we add stuff to them. You know, we add on solar panels, we add on water systems. And in doing so, we make a building that's inherently more expensive up front, and then we've figured out ways to pay for itself. What we should have been doing is conceiving them as green buildings from the start, because a green building is a better building. A green building generates its own energy, cleans its own water, regenerates its environment. In truth, we can't afford not to build a green building. Green building's just better, it's just more. And I think if we just kind of switch our mentality a little bit, it'll really make all the difference. So I'm working now on my 5th book, and for that book, I wrote something really with mainstream appeal, something that would really just appeal to everybody. And I thought about this, and then lawyers got involved, and it got pretty ugly. So, but maybe this is what we need, right? Maybe if we had 1 billion copies of something like this out, it could really start to change the marketplace. But that's not really what's happening. To put things more into perspective, this is the week that I'm having. This is Earth Week, as you know. Sunday was Earth Day, and so it's a pretty crazy week for me. So it started for me in San Francisco on Sunday. I then left San Francisco and then flew, where did I fly to? DC, where I spoke Monday night in DC. I then got on a plane immediately after that and flew back to LA, where I spoke in Santa Barbara on Tuesday night, last night, and then took the red-eye last night to Chicago and landed here this morning, and then I'm speaking here now. And then right after this, I get on another plane and I go to Atlanta, and then I speak in Atlanta tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow night, I speak back in LA. And then I wrap up the whole thing eventually back in Palm Springs on Friday, where I give my final presentation if I don't drop dead first. And the weird irony of all that is that that produces a lot of carbon emissions to do all that. I added it up. It was 6,666 miles, which is, by the way, freaking me out. It's giving me the creeps. I'm sure that one of those planes is going to crash, just statistically speaking at this point, so I might not make it home. But that's kind of the weird irony, is I'm here talking to you about sustainability, and I'm really making things worse. So what I want to do is I wanted to start with a story, a quick story, because like you, I have rich white clients too, right? And that's the way it works. So I was meeting with this woman, this client, and talking about her house. And we're talking about the details of her house, you know, how many bedrooms, how many kitchens, I don't know, whatever you want in it. And I said, what do you want to spend on the house? And she's like, I don't know, should we spend $3 million or $4 million? Like that. And that just bothered me a lot. I don't know, what just really bothered me. And I was in a bad mood, I think, or something, and so I just kind of snapped, and I said, well, if you really don't care, if you're really that cavalier about it, why don't you spend $3 million, and with that extra $1 million, I could build houses for 10 families and transform the lives of 10 families, if you really don't care. And she fired me, of course, right away, immediately fired me. What did you think was going to happen? Can't talk to a client like that. And it taught me an important lesson that I really want to teach to you, which is quite simply, don't make rich people feel guilty. They don't like it. It's a good lesson to learn. The sooner you know that, the better off you'll be. Thanks to the economy, though, I like to play a little game called Who Used to Be a Millionaire? That's kind of a fun little game I like to play now. It makes me feel better about this whole thing. So in light of all this, what we're going to talk about today is what I call dodo sapiens. Because that's what we are. We're dodo sapiens. We do these dumb things that don't make a lot of sense to me. We have a lot of conflicting information in the environment. We spend a lot of time pointing out the obvious, which is weird. It's just odd. We tend to destroy the very thing we're trying to protect, which is maddening. So as a result, we just get, you know, fatter and dumber and slower, and so we just keep getting worse. So that's why we're dodo sapiens. We know we're addicted. We know we have a problem, and we really don't do much about it. So to me, that term defines any species that really their way of life is killing them, and that's really what we've become. Just to put things in perspective for you, I'm going to give you just a quick snapshot of where we are and get all the bad news and depressing stuff out of the way. And then at the end, we'll be singing and dancing. But right now, it's going to be real grim, trust me. Ever since the birth of the Industrial Revolution, 150 years to today, we've put every major environmental system to a state of decline. Every species on the planet is threatened, and 36% of all species are threatened with extinction. And things are just getting worse, by the way. The polar ice caps get thinner and thinner and thinner, and we measure this with data and science, and we've been doing it for decades. And as a direct result of that, the global sea level just keeps rising, 2 millimeters and counting, and it just keeps going up. Not to mention, on top of all this added stress of us now having 7 billion people on the planet. We just crossed this threshold in October. In my lifetime, and I'm not that old, but in my lifetime, the population's doubled. And it's probably going to double again before I'm done. Every major system is in a state of decline. So we are screwed, for lack of a better word. Just screwed. You have to understand something. Nobody even invites me out to dinner anymore. I'm like Debbie Downer. Like, nobody wants to hear from me. All I have is bad news. I'm just not fun to be around anymore. Mostly I'm just kind of sitting home rocking in the fetal position most of the time. And it's just going to get worse. It's just going to get a whole lot worse. It's like this and more. And all the models just keep pointing in that direction. This is from 1962. This is Life magazine, 1962. This is a real ad. I didn't make this up. This is from the non-ironically named Humble Energy. Look at the tagline. Each day, they melt enough to melt 7 million tons of glacier. And they couldn't have known then what we know now, which is that's exactly what we did. That's exactly what we did. The good news is it's not too late. The good news is if we start now, we can save ourselves from ourselves. But we have to do it now, because we've lost all of our free time. We've kind of wasted it. We spent the last 40 years just kind of dragging our feet. Evidence of that is really the past 24 months of weather, which has been some of the most extreme weather we've ever seen in recorded history. We've seen the 10 hottest years on record. 9 of them occurred in this last decade. And it just keeps getting hotter. 2011 was the hottest year so far. We've also seen things like the wettest year on land in history. Tennessee had a 1 in 1,000 year flood. That's like wrath of God, biblical kind of stuff. A high pressure system over Pakistan put a quarter of the country just underwater. That same high pressure system caused the deadliest heat wave in human history. This is over Moscow. Those are fires you're seeing from space. Southern China has a drought that came on so quickly that the fish didn't have time to escape. For the first time ever, China announced that they're going to have to import food. They've never had to do that before because they're China. And just the announcement that they're going to import food has sent food prices skyrocketing. You're paying more for food because of that announcement. And then, of course, here in Chicago, they had some of the worst winters they've ever had. This is Lakeshore Drive right here in Chicago, where it got so bad that people just got out of their cars and walked home. What else could they do? And just as Humble Energy predicted, we melted 7 million tons of glacier. This is the Petermann Glacier in Greenland, 100 square miles of ice. It's the size of Manhattan. Broke off, never to return. God, look at your faces. You're all depressed. I'm sorry. See, I told you. Nobody wants to be around me. It gets better. We laugh at the end. The Amazonia rainforest had its second 100-year drought, just 5 years apart. It's supposed to occur every 100 years. And then if you have any friends from Texas, they'll tell you about the joyful summer they've been having with 95% of the state just on fire. It got so bad that the governor, Rick Perry, the guy that ran for president, he didn't know what to do. So he said, let's just have a day of prayer to pray for rain. And 600 people showed up to pray for rain. That's how bad it is. Here's what you need to understand. This is just the way it's going to be. It's going to be like this and a whole lot more. This is the new normal. This is just it. Paul Gilding wrote this book called The Great Disruption, and Thomas Friedman's been writing about it in his column in the New York Times. And in it, he describes how we're going to change once it gets really bad. It's going to have to get a lot worse in order for us to change. And he says, we will not change systems, though, without a crisis. But don't worry, we're nearly getting there. As the impact of the imminent Great Disruption hits us, our response will be proportionally dramatic, mobilizing as we do in war. We will transform our industries in a matter of decades. Maybe that's what we need. Because we're going to have to rewrite all the weather maps, right? You're going to turn on the news, and hey, give us the weather report. Well, Bob, let's see. It's snowing in Miami, it's raining in Phoenix, and we have a heat wave in Seattle. And we can have what we can only really describe as a devil baby looming over New York. This is just the way it's going to be. This and a whole lot worse. Now, I get to speak all over the country. So oftentimes, I mean, this is a pretty sympathetic crowd, but oftentimes I speak to like NRA groups and like people like that don't really believe a lot of this stuff, and that's fine. It turns out I don't think I can change your mind. It turns out I can't change your mind, scientifically speaking. We call it motivated reasoning. Only you can change your mind. We don't think like scientists. We don't gather up evidence to kind of build a hypothesis. We really tend to think more like lawyers. We really just want to win our side of the argument. So I don't need to change your mind. All I'm going to do is just show you the data, and you can please go look at it for yourself. But you have to remember, we are a nation of addicts. We love our addictions in this country. We got 70 million Americans addicted to tobacco, 74 million Americans addicted to food. I mean, heck, we got 6% of the population just addicted to pot. A lot of them in this room, by the way, I'm going to remind you. But there's one addiction that affects all of us, 100% of us, and that addiction, of course, is fossil fuels. And we know we're addicted. We talk about how we're addicted. Our president comes on the air and says we're addicted to oil, and we don't do anything about it. Now, my dad smoked for 65 years. And my whole life growing up, we would tease him about it, because he would say, when cigarettes are 50 cents a pack, I'm going to quit. When they're $1 a pack, I'm going to quit. And he never quit, because he's an addict. And I hear people make the same arguments about gasoline. When it's $4 a gallon, I'm going to quit. When it's $5 a gallon, I'm going to quit. I dare you to quit. You can't quit. You're addicted. That's the way it works. This is not Photoshop. This is the joy of, living in California for me, really. But this is, give me a number. How high does it need to get? $7, $8, $10 a gallon? Because that's where it's going to go. You have to remember that oil is a commodity. And like any commodity, it's just going to get harder and harder to get, more expensive. Solar, wind, geothermal, those are technologies. And like any technology, they just keep coming down in price. For decades, we were told, if only solar was cheap, we'll use it. Well, it is. We're doing solar for $1.10 a watt now. It is cheap. The trouble is that we have a lot of industries that want to make sure that things don't change. But where are you going to get the oil from? Jurassic Park? You can't grow more oil. Some of you don't get that joke. That's fine. You'll get it on the way home. It's cool. It's a fossil fuel. Can't grow more oil. And if you look at our consumption, it peaked here in the US in 1970, it peaked globally in 2003, and it's just going to get harder and harder for us to get it. So we need to make a choice. We need to make a decision. Do we stay on this path, where we already see it going off the cliff, or do we switch to something simpler? Now, I discovered this term, this medical term, anosognosia. And it's a real word. I didn't make this up. And it describes when a person has a condition, but they don't know they have it. Like how stupid people don't know they're stupid? Like that. That's anosognosia. And we all kind of suffer from this a little bit, because we all kind of know we're addicted to oil, but we don't really address the issue. So that's why I've defined us as this new species, right? In the evolutionary chain, there's Homo sapien, and then boom, Dodo sapien right after that, because that's really what we've become. And I've been studying you people. I've been watching you. I'm like an anthropologist. I go into cafes and I make notes about what you're doing, because it confuses me. Your behavior just is upsetting to me, and you can't really see it. So I just obsess over this. So there's several types of Dodo sapiens I want to talk to you about. The first one is the journalist Dodo sapien. Now, you experience this on a daily basis, right? The trouble is that this is rather dangerous, because let's say a presidential candidate decided tomorrow that they were going to say that the Earth is flat. The journalist would report on it, and they'd spend hours reporting on it, and we'd have to hear about it for hours and hours, and they'd bring in experts talking about it, and they'd say stupid things like, well, it kind of looks flat, and we'd have to hear this over and over again, and it wouldn't make any sense, and it wouldn't give us what we need. Oh, there we go. That's better. And this is the problem. It's not giving us what we need. They're not doing their job. But the story of the century, what they really should be talking about, climate change, is getting less coverage now than it was before Al Gore's movie in 2006. We got bored of it. We had enough, so we got bored. We need more entertainment. We like our news to be enjoyable now. Last summer, there was one story that dominated the entire news cycle, the Casey Anthony story. And that one story dominated 17% of all news coverage. And it was a news story that didn't have a very happy ending, by the way, right? It wasn't really happy for anybody. But that one story just sucked up all the other coverage. And we call this phenomenon, and I kid you not, we call this a news hole. That's what it's called. It's like a black hole. Just one story just obliterates all the others. And we just get obsessed with these stories. When we do have coverage of climate change, it's not the story we need. It's not scientific. It's not data-driven. It's much more opinion-based. And when we do get it, it kind of works like this.
Their science reporting has ranged from gross distortion to outright deception.
Global warming. New Yale study says 57% of teens understand that global warming is caused mostly by humans' activities. Is it really now?
I don't believe climate change is real. I think this is global warming hysteria and alarmism.
So-called global warming, which isn't happening.
Global warming is illusory. We're actually going through a period of global cooling.
Calling carbon dioxide a pollutant? Come on.
Look how much pollution I just put out.
A lot of it would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous.
This is our Fox News global warming alert for you. It is freezing.
Blizzard versus global warming. Who do you believe, Al Gore
or your freezing butt.
A pre-winter into winter storm like Europe hasn't seen in years. Forget about all that global warming talk.
It's not global warming, I'll tell you that.
Another storm could be headed this way next week. Global warming, where are you? We want you back.
Could the biggest mistake we've ever made been that we named it this pleasant-sounding term, global warming? Could our downfall be that people are too dumb to tell the difference between climate and weather? Which brings us to our next type of Dodo sapien, the capitalist Dodo sapien. Now, you've experienced this your whole life, and you know that they're kind of evil, like you know, we kind of joke about it. Back in the 50s and 60s, hey, when's a good time to start my baby on cola? Oh, no time like the present. 7-Up's full of vitamins and minerals that make your baby grow. But we can laugh about this, but if anything, they've just gotten much better at it. ExxonMobil, the most profitable corporation in the history of the world, they spend millions of dollars just trying to convince you that climate change doesn't exist. And they don't even need to convince you. All they need to do is plant a seed of doubt, and they're very good at it. And this is the trouble. But somehow they've convinced most of the nation, a majority, that it's not the oil companies that want to keep digging up for oil, that somehow it's a conspiracy by the scientists to get money for their grant research. Somehow that's more believable. Have you ever met a scientist? They don't have the social skills to pull that off. Are you kidding? They're nerdy. They're pocket protectors, and they can't even look you in the eye. They're awkward. Couldn't possibly be this, but this is what we believe. Luckily for us, we hold scientists in such high regard, don't we? We put them on pedestals. We trade them on playing cards with our friends, right? Right up there at the top of the echelon is scientists. Right after, of course, you know, actors, musicians, athletes, politicians, heiresses, reality TV show stars, cartoonists, game show hosts, women who look good in bikinis, but then right after that, scientists, right up there. And this is the problem, which leads us to our next type of Dodo sapien, the bureaucrat Dodo sapien. Now, you could argue bureaucracy is an important part of democracy. In fact, the opposite of bureaucracy is anarchy, marked here by the circle A. And then, of course, the ultimate symbol of convenience, marked here by the circle K. But the bureaucracy has kind of gotten out of hand. It's kind of gotten in the way of our innovation. If Noah wanted to build his ark today, he couldn't. First, he'd need a building permit, right, which would take months. Then they make him put in a sprinkler system, you know, because it's a wood frame building. Then the HOA would come down on him and people would complain that he has this ugly thing in his driveway. Then he'd need a height variance because the stupid ark is too big. The SPCA would make sure that all the animals are taken care of. He'd be cited, ironically, for building in a floodplain. Who knew? And then, of course, the INS would make sure that all the workers are documented and, you know, and have a green card. And then finally, the unions would make sure that they're all union members. And the thing would never get done. It would take decades. Other countries are leapfrogging us. This is the Burj Khalifa. This is now the tallest building in the world. This is 2,700 feet tall. That's half a mile. It took 5.5 years to get it done. To give you a sense of scale, it's the height of 2 World Trade Towers stacked tip to tip. It's massive. But our own World Trade Center is still taking 10 years and still not quite done yet. But we used to be innovators in this country. We used to do remarkable things in this country. Clean legislation, climate change, and all this other stuff could pave the way to a 21st century that's bright and glorious. We're facing the worst recession in 80 years, and at a time when we need to be innovating, we're desperately grasping on to these old technologies that are really sinking us. Green-collar jobs are our future, and by 2030, some 20 million Americans will have them. This is what we need to focus on. And the trouble is what I call additive thinking.
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs eat man. Woman inherits the earth.
Hopefully you could hear that. I could barely hear it. This is additive thinking. That's an example of additive thinking, right? Well, man needs shelter. Shelter needs light. Light needs electricity. Electricity needs, I don't know, coal. So coal needs mining. Mining needs regulations. Mining produces pollution. Pollution needs cleanup. And we never go back to question the initial assumption. We never step back to say, do we really need coal? Isn't there something better? So I want to take you on a time warp. I want to take you back to a simpler time, a happier time, a time when everybody wore terrible clothing and they had stupid haircuts. And I call this time, quite frankly, 1972. And it's 40 years. It's like long enough where some of you were alive back then, and some of you that weren't, it's not like prehistoric ages, right? It's 1972. It's only 40 years. And it was a weird time to be alive. It was a trippy time, man. I'm telling you, you don't realize how bad it was back then. Do you realize if you had a phone call You had to be at home to get it. You understand? It was corded to the wall, usually in the kitchen. And if someone had a 9 or a 0 in their number, you hated them, right? Because you didn't want to wait for the dial to come around. It was a terrible time. You had to get up to change the channel. Do you see what I'm saying to you? Awful, awful time to be alive. This is what watches were like back then. It was weird. This is how bad it was. This is what their Batman looked like. Do you see what I'm saying to you? It was a weird, weird time. Books came on paper, whatever that is, and you had to go to a library to get them, wherever they are. And then video games. Really? Spent hours, hours playing that. This was the best-selling car of the year that year. A car that blew up if you sneeze too hard. And don't even get me started on the music and on the haircuts. It was a dark, dark time. They could only use their spaceships once back then. Isn't that trippy? And computers filled entire rooms. The internet only appeared on 25 of them, by the way, which probably explains why porn back then looked like this. It was an awful time to be alive. It was terrible. I don't know how they did it, quite frankly. Every major technology has just leapt leaps and bounds since then. Every major technology has just grown so much better since then. Every major technology except our buildings. Do you realize we have three-dimensional printers capable of producing these geometries we never even conceived of before? But our buildings still look like this. We have electric vehicles capable of running hundreds of miles on a single charge. But our buildings still look like this. We've got three-dimensional scanners capable of digitizing entire rooms and manipulating them in real time. But our buildings still look like this. We have solar tracking devices that convert the sun's light to heat and energy in real time. But our buildings still look like this. We even have a little thing you put in your pocket that tells you when the hot donuts are ready. That's impressive. But the donut shop still looks like this. Every major technology has leapt except our buildings. And the trouble is us, the building professionals. We're really to blame. It's our fault, really. You got engineers who prize efficiency over all else. They think way too linearly, so they're useless. You got architects that are too timid and shy to speak up and insecure to speak up what really needs to be done. You got contractors who build exactly what you tell them to. Really? Was that a good idea? Really? Who's that for? And don't even get me started on the building officials. We put in a gray water system into a building. That's where we take all the soapy water from the sink and use it to flush the toilets. It's a good idea, right? Makes a lot of sense. Well, the inspector said, "Oh, you got to put up this sign." Who's that for? And he said, totally straight-faced. He's like, "Well, sometimes dogs drink out of the toilet." And I said, "My dog can't read." So useless. It's just useless. But buildings are what need to change. Buildings have the biggest impact of any other industry. Half of our carbon emissions come from our buildings. Einstein famously said, "We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive." So we need to change our buildings. We need to stop being dodo sapiens. It doesn't make any sense. Do you realize that we outsourced all of our jobs to China to save money, and we bankrupted ourselves in the process? Do you realize we raise money for juvenile diabetes by selling candy? Do you understand the issue with that? That's called irony, really. And Sun Chips, which are delicious, by the way, they came out with this new bag, this great new bag, this biodegradable bag, and you throw it away, it feeds the soil. What a great idea. People complained. It makes too much noise when I open the bag. It's too crinkly when I open it, and I can't hear myself shoving the chips in my fat face. So they changed the bag back. You only get the biodegradable bag in Europe now. We're the only species on Earth that produces so much waste, we pay people to pick through it, to mine it for the valuable resources that we can't be bothered to get. I worked on the sustainability plan for the city of Cleveland, and I asked them, quite frankly, "Hey, what's it cost you to throw something away?" And they said, "Oh, that's easy. They charge us $30 a ton for everything we throw away." I said, "What's it cost you to recycle?" And they didn't know, so they had to look it up. They said, "Actually, they pay us $26 a ton to recycle." And as soon as they said that aloud, they realized they're losing $56 for every ton they don't recycle. So they're now instituting a mandatory recycling program because they can't afford not to. I don't understand why this is okay. Some would call this beautiful. Some would call this attractive. They look forward to this. But if I want to do this, yuck, ooh, that's awful. That's disgusting. I don't want that near my house. That's bizarre to me. I don't understand why we do this. You pull up at an intersection. This is near my house, by the way. And what do you see? You see a Walgreens, a CVS, and a Rite Aid. Who's that for? We really need that many options to get circus peanuts and hair gel? I don't understand who that's for. And look at how they're set back off the street. They're essentially daring you to drive to them. You couldn't possibly walk to them. You wouldn't even walk from one to the other. You would need a car just to drive across the street. So they don't engage the community, and I call this retail redundification, and it only happens here in the US. And this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why the bank is open, if you're lucky, 3 hours a week, but the porno store, 24/7, whenever you need it. I don't understand why we're shutting down libraries right and left, but fossil fuels you can get anytime you want. If you need fossil fuels, 24/7, it's open. You can pretty much rest assured that if it's open 24/7, it's either bad for you or bad for the planet. Except this guy. I don't understand this guy. I don't know who this is for. I guess he needs to sleep. I don't know. I don't know who that's for. I don't understand why we water the asphalt. Do people think it's going to grow? What do they think is going to happen there? I don't understand why we leave lights on in the daytime. They don't work in the daytime. I don't understand if the building's vacant, why we leave all the lights on. What are they going to steal? The air? There's nothing in there. They don't even have shelving in there anymore. So we're just dodo sapiens. We do these dumb things. It just doesn't make any sense. 80% of us live in urbanized areas, suburbs and cities, most of us. Only 20% live in, the sticks, rural areas. And most of these areas really were designed around this additive thinking. We'll locate all the cities by waterways, because that'll become our distribution system. We'll put all the factories in the waterways and pollute all the waterways, and then all the workers will come in, and then once we destroy the site and the taxes get too high, the factories will leave. And that's what happened in the 40s and 50s. And then all the cities will have this vacant infrastructure and just blight in its wake. And all they'll move out to the suburbs. But the suburbs just kept sprawling. And in the advent of cheap energy, that was fine. That made a lot of sense. But now it doesn't make sense anymore. And the suburbs are bizarre because the businesses moved out there. There were no workers. There were no housing. So we had to build it all. And then it made us move out further and further and further and perpetuated the sprawl. And we never went back to question the initial assumption. And most of the suburbs were really designed to work like this. That's it. That's the whole trip. That's the whole thing. That's what we do. What we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, how does nature build community? How does nature build neighborhoods? And nature does it quite simply, through density, diversity, and symbiosis. And this is what we need to infuse in all of our projects. If you're doing a kitchen remodel, you're doing a whole house or a whole development, because the suburbs are scaleless. A 1-minute drive is a 15-minute walk. So who wants to walk out there? I was visiting my dad in Florida. And like most people in Florida, he's grumpy. He's a real grumpy guy. You met people from Florida. You know what I'm talking about. And I said, Dad, can we just go out? Can we just go outside and get out of the air conditioning and just go for a walk? And he's like, no, I don't want to. That's how he sounds. And I said, Dad, don't you realize every time we go to the market, we're walking. That's walking when we go to the market. In fact, if you go up and down every aisle, that's a mile. You've walked a mile. But you don't notice because you're in the market and there's stuff to see. But the suburbs are scaleless. Who wants to walk a mile past something like this? They don't. Meaning if we just start to infuse these spaces with life, with people, with activity, we can bring a scale back to them, and maybe walking might return. If anything, the Apple Store is living proof that you can have cutting-edge, high-end, modern design in a traditional neighborhood. And frankly, I don't know how they do it. But instead, most of our developments really follow this model.
Come on, take pictures of it. A lot of pictures. Knock it down, we pour cement as far as you could see. Everything living gets cut down. You're a genius, boss.
I love their faces at the end. A typical big box store is 15 acres. That's typical. But when you as designers see 15 acres, what you should be seeing is potential, because it's a lot of potential. 15 acres could potentially be 10 megawatts of energy. It could be potentially 300 people's worth of oxygen. It could be, if you really want to get nuts, over 500,000 pounds of strawberries, if you really want to look at it. But instead, we just cover the whole thing with asphalt. And most of them are really designed for one time of the year, Christmas, the worst case scenario. Most of them are at least twice, if not more, overbuilt for their parking lot for the other 10 months of the year. And when these stores go out of business, they've taken a pristine site and just left blight in their wake. So we've literally paved over paradise and put up giant parking lots everywhere. And again, it's this additive thinking. Store needs parking needs asphalt, but then asphalt triggers all these other things. Retention ponds, swales, drainage, big concrete pipes. And it toxifies the water in the process. And we never go back to question the assumption. I sit on the Sustainability Commission for a city in California called Palm Desert. And what we've done is we've now gone through and we've counted the parking in all of the retail areas. And not during Christmas time, but the rest of the year. And we found that something like a Home Depot, At best, it's only 32% full. The Costco is only 28% full. The Walmart's only 40% full. And the little strip mall is only 15% full. Most of them are just horribly overbuilt, much bigger than they need to be. If the typical big box store is 15 acres, just the box, just the store is 3. Just the box. But the rest of the site is virtually all asphalt. 5% on those little medians, but practically all asphalt. But what if we change the code a little bit? What if we put in a little dedicated parking area up front? This is for 10 months out of the year, and this is where everybody will park. The 32% will park. Then you have a loading dock. That could be whatever you need it to be. But then the rest of the site would just be green. Reinforced earth, strong enough for a fire truck to drive on, but that's the overflow parking during Christmas time. But otherwise, it's green most of the year. We cover the whole thing with a cool roof, and we've dropped the temperature of the site by 20 degrees. And it's paid for itself in the first summer. And then in the very front, we put community gardens, and we grow food. And where do you think they're going to buy their supplies from? From the big box store. This is what we're trying to do in Palm Desert. For new buildings, we're not going to start with asphalt as the starting point and work backward. We're going to start with green and work forward. We're going to move the building back up to the street where it belongs. We put the little dedicated parking area up front where it belongs, and the rest of the site can just be overflow, can just be an amenity. We cover the whole thing with a green roof, and we made it better than it was before. If the store goes out of business, they're not creating blight, they're creating something beautiful. We can even change the massing, break it up, and make parks. So it'd be a park first and a business second, not the other way around. Because after all, this is a color photograph. But this is what we've done. And we call this plan, for lack of a better word, we call it the de-asphaltification plan, which, by the way, is a great Scrabble word. It's like triple word score. You should use it. It's awesome. You have to realize something. The suburbs are a failed experiment. You're living in a failed experiment. It never worked. The suburbs were this dream, this hoax that you could go and fetch your own little private piece of land. You could have your own little slice of nature. Which is it? Is this the little slice you're talking about? Is that the slice? Is that my private piece of nature? That's a fantasy. It's fake. And we have whole buildings that are fake. We have whole materials that are fake. We have materials in this room that are fake. These are not really clouds, just so you know. I don't know if you knew that. These are not really columns. They're not holding anything up. These are not really stones. That's not really a cat. See what I'm saying? It's all fake. These are not really bricks. It's wallpaper, to be honest with you. These are not really stones, and they're certainly not really structural. These are not really flowers. This is not even a divided light window. It's all fake. It's just fake, fake, fake. And then my biggest pet peeve, shutters. These are not real shutters. They're too big anyway. They'd hit each other. Do you understand? I don't know what they were thinking. They didn't size them for the window. They're glued to the building anyway. They're stuccoed on. We have whole buildings that are fake. This is my brother-in-law's house in La Jolla, and he's a jerk anyway, so we can make fun of him. The whole thing is fake. I mean, look at it. The window projector, it's all fake. Those shutters don't work. The fenestration's fake. Those aren't divided lights. The assembly's fake. That's not a panelized door. It's a single sheet of metal that's stamped to look like panels. It's lying to you. The massing's fake. Those corbels and headers don't hold up anything. They're foam covered with stucco. The trim is fake. It's just molding for molding's sake. And even the massing's fake. That room doesn't even get bigger up there. It's just they thicken the wall. That's it. It's all fake. Fake, fake, fake. Michael Pollan wrote this great book called In Defense of Food. And it's a manifesto for how we should eat. And the best part is you don't need to buy the book because the manifesto is on the cover. He just put it on the cover. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And then 384 pages explaining that. But really, that's it. That's the whole thing. And I thought, that's what we need for our buildings. So I wrote one. Build your buildings, not so spread out, and restore the nature you've destroyed in the process. Simple and elegant. And that's what we should live by. One way of doing that is through the Living Building Challenge. This is like LEED, but on steroids. This is much better than LEED. I mean, I've done a lot of LEED, and I'm bored of it, quite frankly. I mean, I'll still do it. I need the work, so if you wanted me to do it, I'll be happy to do it for you. But it's boring. This is interesting. This is for regenerative living buildings, and you can download the checklist for free, so take a look. The second way is through what's called biomimicry. And biomimicry is really building the way nature builds. It's looking to nature to learn the lessons of how nature builds, because we weren't the first to build. Nature did it for millions of years before us. And nature does it in an elegant way. Nature runs exclusively on sunlight. It only uses the resources it needs, and it thrives on diversity. In fact, it banks on it. And we could learn a lot from nature. Because only mankind has global supply chains where we schlep stuff all over the planet. Nature uses all of its materials locally. Only mankind uses CO2 as a waste product. Nature uses it as a building block. Only mankind builds the same way no matter where it is. Arizona, Alaska, whatever, it's all the same. Nature adapts to each site, each environment uniquely. And lastly, only mankind consumes and consumes and consumes and consumes and consumes to the point of excess. And to be fair, this was the fattest zebra I could find. I mean, I was trying to be fair. I studied under students of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I really consider Mr. Wright the first green architect. This is actually not far from here. This is outside of Madison, Wisconsin. This is his second Jacobs house, if you know his work. And he called it the solar hemicycle house. And it's really a true textbook green building, right? The whole thing's oriented to the sun, past the solar house. This is the north. This is the front door. And it's bermed up and protected from the weather, which makes a lot of sense. But when you get around to the south, boom, it opens up to the sun. And the whole width of it is 1 room thick, and the sun comes through the windows and heats that stone mass wall, and the thermal mass stores all that heat all day and radiates out at night. And then the second floor is set back, so heat rises up along the windows and heats that second floor. It's a beautiful textbook solar building. You couldn't move it on the site if you wanted to. But instead, with our buildings, we just plunk them down wherever they want. And we've kind of forgotten how to do this. Every building should have at least a green roof, a living roof. And not only does it absorb carbon and produce oxygen, but it has a lot of other benefits too. My old mentor, Malcolm Wells, described it like this. He called it an underground building. You build a nice waterproof box, you berm earth against it, and you cover the whole thing with native plants. Boom, you're done. And the effects are spectacular. They're insanely beautiful. They're beyond anything you could possibly comprehend. They're just gorgeous. This is the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. It's a 2.5-acre roof. It's the largest green roof in the world. It's a habitat. It's an amenity. If the museum closes, who cares? Because they've created something better in its wake. This is Myllyanbaz. This is in Fukuoka, Japan. Here, let's play a little game. Can you spot the green building in this photograph? This is what we need. And we now have whole generations of architects that are learning as much about biology and nutrient flow as they are about design. And we're creating living buildings. Inside the buildings, we could have living walls, green walls, just like on the roof. And aside from the obvious benefits of cleaning the air, the effects are beautiful. They could be glorified advertisements to full canvases, really, if you really want to think about it. This is the work of Patrick Blanc in France, and they're just insanely beautiful. I mean, they're just gorgeous. They take, just the simplest buildings and just, raise them up. This is his sketchbook. Those are species of plants, by the way. Even mundane buildings. This is the parking garage, and it's just insanely beautiful. Transforms public spaces. We should do this on every wall. Every wall should be a living wall. And inside the building, we could do this indoors, too. These could be everything from simple accents to whole elements, to whole things like staircases and elevators, right? The whole thing, the whole experience can be shaped by nature. This is the Hotel Moderna in Portland. It's the whole thing's conceived of as this beautiful green space. And this is my favorite. This is Longwood Gardens. This is outside of Philadelphia. It's the largest living wall in the country. 2,500 square feet of just plants. Why would you want drywall? Ugh, drywall's icky. It's gross. And instead of just putting plants, if you really wanted to go nuts, you could grow food and solve a lot of other problems at the same time. Every kitchen we design now grows a portion of its own food somewhere on the project, either inside or outside. Every project we're trying to look at food production in some way, because nature is a wonderful R&D development. 3.8 billion years of research and development ahead of us. We were not the first to design. If you look at something as elegant and simple as a tree, just look at a tree as a design problem, right? A tree makes oxygen, sequesters carbon, fixes nitrogen, provides habitat for hundreds of species. And what do we do with it? Let's chop it down and write on it. We're missing the point. Do you understand? Because nature builds structures like this at room temperature. It does this in ocean water. There's no heat or pressure involved. If we look to nature, we can find whole new structural systems, whole new typologies. We can learn how to build out of fragile materials and make them strong like this glass sponge. We can learn how to build cement out of paper, the way the wasps do. We can learn how to build air conditioning without electricity, the way the termites do. We can learn how to deploy rapidly renewable buildings, like in mushrooms. In fact, mushrooms are a good source of inspiration. They're launching a whole new suite of chemistry. And we already have buildings that are inspired by mushrooms anyway, so maybe it's a good thing. We've been copying nature quite literally for decades, but what I'm talking about is living buildings, living materials, materials that we grow, quite literally. And my old mentor, Malcolm Wells, described it like this. He drew this in 1980. Buildings that would grow on the site. So if you get married and need more space, you just plant another seed. And you guys have kids and need more space, you just plant another seed. And the building could quite literally grow. And we now have whole generations of architects that are growing buildings. Buildings that thicken up in the summertime to shade themselves and thin out in the wintertime to let the sun in to keep warm. Buildings that look like they could just take flight and go up in the air. Buildings that you can't tell the line between where nature stops and mankind starts. And buildings that look like creatures that we just crawl into and live in. And what do we build? This is pretty good. Not bad. Big square box filled with known cancer-causing chemicals, formaldehyde, VOCs, known carcinogens, in a windowless toxic gas chamber. Yeah, it's great. I love it. That doesn't make any sense. We've known for a long time how to build a green kitchen, a green bath. These are things that you should be doing automatically. If you don't know them, I'm happy to talk to you about it afterwards. But just do these, just force it on your clients. Believe me, it's much easier than asking permission. Because if you see this, something's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Somebody's made a mistake. This means you specified the wrong thing. If you see this on your project, I want you to ask the guys installing it, hey, you going to leave those behind for the people that have to live here? Because it doesn't make sense. We shouldn't kill our clients. That's bad for business. Do you realize every time a child crawls across the carpet, they're absorbing known phthalates, known endocrine disruptors through their little pudgy hands and pudgy knees? But who regulates building materials? Nobody. You got the EPA, they regulate the environment, the FDA regulates food, and the USDA regulates agriculture. And technically all three could regulate building materials, but none of them do. So it just kind of falls through the cracks. And every now and again I get a client that says to me, why can't we just use vinyl in the kitchen? It's cheap. Well, Twinkies are cheap. Why don't you eat those every day? Yeah, eat them every day, 3 square meals a day. They're cheap. You'd be dead in 3 days, that's why. You wouldn't, of course you're not going to do that. Why would we do that with our buildings? We ingest these materials, we breathe them in. We should look at our materials as nutrients, sources of vitamins. We could be feeding the baby vitamin D instead of Alzheimer's. That's what we should be doing. We could have phase change materials, materials that change color based on our mood, based on the season, based on the time of day. Outside the building, we could have phase change materials that are white in the summer to reflect heat and dark in the winter to absorb heat and go back and forth again. So we can regulate them thermically. We could have rapidly renewable materials like bamboo, but we could grow them here in this country instead of importing them all the way from China. And we could create jobs in the process. Some of them grow 3 feet in a day, so maybe we can't afford not to do them. If you look at plants closely, it looks like they're alive. Because they are. They're alive. What'd you think? They're fake? They're real plants. We call it the secret life of plants. And this process of tracking the sun, we call thermotropic. And we're just now starting to scratch the surface of what thermotropic really means. Imagine the fun that you could have with thermotropic buildings. Imagine how much whimsy we could put into our projects with true thermotropic buildings. Imagine if we had self-healing materials, materials that if you cut them, they heal the way your skin does. And we're just now starting to scratch the surface of that. This is self-healing concrete. I think our buildings should challenge us. I think our buildings should force us to think. I think if you get in the elevator, you want to go to the 3rd floor, you got to know it's the square root of 9. You can't go. I think that's important. I think if we're going to be fake with our materials, we should really be fake. We should embrace our fakeness. We should have windows that change the scene. So you could have dinner in Paris if you want. You could have breakfast in San Francisco if you really wanted to. If you really wanted to, you could sleep on the moon. Whatever you want. Let's really be fake. Let's enjoy the fakeness instead of lying about it. I think we could take some of these other technologies, we could digitize things like this and make them into buildings. And maybe we can't afford not to. For decades we were told that somehow this is good. And then later a green building was somehow better. But if the first one's good and the second one's better, what we really need now are living buildings, regenerative buildings, buildings that restore their environment. Because most of the environmental movement has been really about making you feel bad about yourself, making you feel guilty. But that's not effective. That doesn't work. The last 10 years have really been about payback. What's it, how's it going to pay for itself? And that's better. But really what we need to focus on now is our own dodo survival, just how we get through this mess and get out of it. And there's a whole slew of books that are warning you, telling you, and most people aren't listening. But nobody wants to see this, do they? Most of the environmental movement has been volunteer. This is a volunteer. These are volunteers. That's fun. That's a fun Saturday. I've done many, many of them with my students. It's great. But it's not a way to sustain a movement. It's not a way to make the change we need in the time we need. Because think about it. For decades, we've been telling people, please, for the love of God, just change your light bulbs. I got to get up. I don't want to do that. But they're better. They save energy, and they save money, and they last longer. Please, just change your light bulbs. No, I'm tired. And they don't. And then it dawned on me. You think you're going to guilt people to change their light bulbs? We can't even get people to wash their hands. You think you're going to get them to change their light bulbs? Only 1 in 5 people don't wash their hands. And now that you know that, you can't unknow that, by the way. So you're welcome. You think you're going to guilt people to recycle? We can't even get people to not spit on each other. Are you kidding? We're not going to guilt people in anything. You think you're going to get them to turn off the water when they brush their teeth? We can't even get them to not strangle the dancers, whatever that means, right? You think you're going to get them to conserve water? We can't even get them to not pee on each other. You're not going to get people to do anything. We can't even get them to keep their butts off the beach. Volunteerism is not the way to go. We need to force them on people. Trust me. We can't even get people to not text and drive. So there's no way you're going to just force them to change the light bulbs, right? I've been thinking a lot about the Amish lately. Anybody Amish in here? No, the Amish never come out. It's amazing. They never come out. The Amish, they're starting to piss me off, and I'll tell you why. They were right about everything, the Amish. Who knew? Those bearded apple-churning butter bastards were right about everything. It's unbelievable. They have no carbon footprint, the Amish. Do you realize that? They don't use power tools. They don't have TVs. They don't use any electricity. Zero of carbon footprint. And they're spared all the crap that we have to deal with. They've never heard of Snooki or Britney Spears or the Kardashians. They don't have to deal with any of that nonsense. The Amish people have never heard of Larry the Cable Guy or, you know, Charlie Sheen. They've never seen Anthony's Wiener. Do you see what I'm saying to you? I guarantee you an Amish person's never had a KFC Double Down. That's just never happened. And that sounds appealing, doesn't it? That just sounds better. We could learn a lot from these people. They know how to grow their own food. They know how to build buildings. We should be paying attention to them. We could learn a lot. I'm going to get a pork pie hat and change my name to Ezekiel at this point because I think they found the right thing. Which leads me to my last point, the last type of dodo sapien, which is you, the affected ones. I read this recently, that Americans are profoundly bored by climate change. It's boring. It's fun when someone here. It's boring. It's a drag. Oh, I'm sorry. Is our impending doom too boring for you? I'm sorry that you're not interested in your own livelihood. Maybe something like this would be of more interest to you.
Lasting memories on the Teeter Towers. Oh, see? Unforgettable. Yeah, I think she discovered a whole new way to stroll down memory lane.
#1 show in its time slot. If you're so bored by climate change, why don't you have another hot dog eating contest? Why don't you play another million hours of Angry Birds if you're so bored with climate change? Why don't you see yet another superhero movie? If climate change is so boring to you, I'm so sorry. But perhaps who said it best was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
They serve that obligation not by explaining the difficult issues that we need to understand to make rational decisions in a democracy, but rather by entertaining us, by appealing to the lowest common denominator, the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian core of our brains for sex and celebrity gossip. So they give us 3 weeks of Anna Nicole Smith, and they give us, you know, Lacey Peterson and Kobe Bryant and, you know, Michael Jackson and, you know, and Brad and Janet, Brad and Angelina, and we know more about Kate and Tom than we do about global warming. And American people are today the best entertained and the least informed people on the face of the earth.
His much more famous uncle once said, "Let us not seek to fix blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future." So we need to stop. I'm going to skip this. We need to stop being dodo sapiens. We need to stop bragging about our consumption, bragging about how much money we waste. We need to stop doing these dumb things. This is my neighbor, by the way. He's a douchebag, terrible person. We need to stop doing this. We need to reverse this cycle of additive thinking. We need to embrace living buildings because the living building generates its own energy, cleans its own waste, restores its own environment. It provides solutions. It ultimately provides hope. The very last thing I want to leave you with is this headline. A sharp cut in burning fossil fuels is urged to battle the shift in climate. The trouble is this headline is from 1988. We've known about this for a long time. We've been dragging our feet for 4 decades. Winston Churchill famously said, "I always count on Americans to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted every other possible option." We've exhausted every other possible option. The time has come to do something about it. Force it on all of your clients. You'll feel better, trust me. You just saw 400 slides very quickly. You can download them from this link here. Otherwise, I'd love to get a business card from each of you. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the show. Have a good week. Thank you very much.